Hello, how are you? Thank you for making it.
Hi there, it's such a pleasure, and I'm so sorry I'm late.
Thank you. That's okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, you can hear Milena, okay?
Yes.
Okay, and we've got some students and a little bit of general public
Oh,
here
that's
for
great.
this,
Thanks for sharing that.
this dissertation event. So I'll just briefly introduce Milena Braticevic. She's going to be presenting her dissertation project, Psychophysiological Effects of Increasing Awareness of Non-Duality and the Natural State in Young Adults, here at California Institute for Human Science. And so now I will screen share with those on Zoom and turn it over to Milena.
Thank you all for being here today. It's a great pleasure to present here, to be here. And thank you so much for your interest in my work. I would like to thank, first of all, my committee, Dr. Mali Burgess. Professor Burgess has been instrumental in my progress, both in my dissertation courses and throughout the PhD program. I took a number of courses with Dr. Burgess over the years, and I took a course on Nondual Awareness with her, which changed my life. So thank you for all your contribution. I sincerely appreciate it. I would also like to thank Dr. Thomas Brophy, who introduced me to the Foundations of Integral Health at CIHS, and whose scientific approach really was instrumental in my understanding of the applications of integral health principles. Also, a sincere thank you to Dr. Sharon Miharis, who introduced me to the science of eco-psychology and helped me understand that human health is an integral part of nature. I would like to thank all the students who are here today. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with you over the past few years, as well as my parents who are with me today to share this moment. So this presentation is a culmination of about 5 years of study and research, as well as the research project that I did in April and May of this year. And the topic of my dissertation is psychophysiological effects of increasing awareness of non-duality and the natural state in young adults. So I'll just proceed. We can go on to the next slide. So according to Dr. Hiroshi Motoyama in his book, The Science and Evolution of Consciousness, mystical traditions assert that human beings are interconnected and mutually involved in a gradual process whose aim is the ultimate realization of the absolute non-dualistic reality. Many sources have taught that the human being is not alone, not separate from the universe, but in fact, essentially unified with all being. Sense-dependent consciousness belies this truth, suggesting that we lead an unconnected and perhaps meaningless existence. Science is beginning to investigate the mystical empirical claims, and I'm happy to present my contribution to this goal. I wanted to talk a little bit about the reasons for choosing this topic. There is a really high prevalence of depression and anxiety in young adults. Young adult, specifically aged between 18 and 29, is a critical transitional period in life. And what happens during this time has significant implications for the future career, family, and well-being of young people. And while this time is really supposed to be a time of exploration, learning, application of knowledge, and creativity, many young people face considerable challenges during this time due to a rapidly changing and stressful world. Also, there is an immense pressure to achieve success or to conform to these societal standards of what success should be. And this pressure is essentially based on a dualistic belief system. There is a predetermined outcome that young people need to achieve even before they become adults fully. Depression and anxiety is on the rise within this population. Symptoms of depression are a sense of hopelessness, loss of interest in daily activities, worthlessness, and a low sense of meaning and agency. And symptoms of anxiety are extensive worry, rumination, inability to relax and feeling overwhelmed. And these symptoms really show that there is a significantly reduced quality of life for young people who are experiencing depression and anxiety. I experienced my first depression at age 28, and what was really interesting during this time is that it was a complete surprise. One day, I was feeling completely fine, and then the next day, nothing was fine. And it really intrigued me into, trying to inquire into what are the conditions for a healthy mind, and how can we know if we are on the way of developing depression or severe anxiety. Also, after taking the integral spiritual coaching course at CIHS, I did a coaching pilot project in the summer of 2008, where I worked with a number of young people, and I really discovered that they're very open to integral health paradigm and to learning about non-duality. And in this experience, I saw that I needed a very minimal amount of coaching sessions with them to achieve significant improvement in their symptoms. At the same time, I became interested in alternative healing therapies. Research into therapies with entheogens, such as psilocybin and ayahuasca, showed significant possibilities of tapping into the mind's natural healing abilities. And these are effectively used for PTSD, addiction, depression, anxiety, and can lead to the awakening of non-dual awareness and the sense of integration of experience. Studies in the use of entheogens and psilocybin and ayahuasca show that these can profoundly affect perception and a sense of meaning with sustained long-term effects even after a single use. They typically lead to a dissolution of the ego and a dissolution of a sense of separateness, as well as reduction in activity of the amygdala and the default mode network, which is responsible for rumination. I had a personal experience in shamanic healing about 7 years ago at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. And although this experience did not use any sacred plants, it basically consisted of a week-long meditation kind of retreat where every day we were guided through a number of meditations. It really led to a profound change in my experience of reality, and this contributed to my interest in a holistic approach to mental health, because I realized that the human system has an innate ability to access these states of consciousness, even without the use of entheogens. A little bit about the theoretical background. According to the World Health Organization report, depression and anxiety are a leading cause of disability worldwide. They account for about 30% of global disease burden, and prevalence is the highest amongst young adults. It's about 20% compared to 10% for adults, and it's on the rise. It's also, these mental conditions are two most common causes for college students seeking counseling. Due to less predictable pathways for young adults today compared to previous generations, and challenges such as increased costs of education, higher unemployment, and higher costs of living, young adults are facing increased challenges. They're also leading surprisingly unhealthy lifestyles because they're less likely to exercise and get regular health checkups, and more likely to eat fast food and engage in risky behavior. This population is also most affected by abuse of prescription medication, such as opioids, ADHD, and anti-anxiety drugs. Current treatments, such as medication and therapy, are based on diagnosis and recovery, and there is very little attention geared towards prevention. Again, according to the World Health Organization, only about 3% of national health budgets are directed towards prevention. In addition to this, there is considerable stigma around mental health. There's pressure on social media. There's cyberbullying and aggression, and young people often don't seek treatment due to embarrassment or shyness. While severe mental conditions such as severe depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia require medication, other conditions, serious mental health conditions such as mild to moderate depression could probably benefit from more prevention-oriented paradigms. And also at the same time, while medications can ease symptoms of depression, they don't necessarily address the underlying causes of depression and anxiety. Less than 20% of young adults receive appropriate treatment, and this also leads to increased visits to emergency rooms and hospitalizations. So it's pretty obvious that a new paradigm based on prevention and mental health literacy is needed, and that young adults really need to have agency over their mental health. And this really brings us to the question of introducing a new paradigm that's based on the philosophy of mind, that asks what is the mind and what is the nature of reality, and have that be the basis for mental health literacy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the nature of the mind. So it's often thought that the mind is this intellectual capability or ability to reason, which is located in the brain. However, literature shows that the mind is really not a fixed or independent entity, that the mind is embodied, emerging, and relational in nature. Embodied means that the mind and the body are really interconnected, and the mind regulates the flow and energy of information through the body. According to the founder of the bioenergetic therapy, Alexander Lowen, thought and memory seem to exist throughout the body. He explained that the mind-body connection, the flow of energy in the body, is facilitated by functions such as breathing, moving, feeling, and self-expression. And all of these are important for a healthy mind. Also, studies show that patterns of thought and emotion can contribute to disease. Studies in behavioral patterns and personality types show, for example, that type A personality, which is prone to more aggressiveness, impatience, and competitiveness, is twice as likely to develop heart disease compared to those that are not with type A behavioral pattern. The emerging quality of the mind really means that the mind has the ability to learn and develop, that the mind is adaptive, and that it can create new connections through new experiences. The science of neuroplasticity shows us that the neurons that fire together wire together, and that neural connections can be either strengthened or weakened through experiences. Also, studies show that neuroplasticity is weakened in those who are affected by a major depressive disorder, and that the repetition of painful experiences can result in exponential negative effects by increasing the brain's receptivity to pain. So this is the quality of neuroplasticity. The mind is also relational in nature, which really means that the health of the mind depends on the health of our relationships with ourselves, with others, with nature as well. And it is really in the experience of and in relation with the inner and the outer world that the individual experiences anxiety and depression. The relational theory of the mind also speaks to the ego developmental stages, which are explained through a couple of different theories, but essentially it shows that our sense of self can evolve from an egocentric to an ethnocentric, where a person identifies with the group, and then in more non-dual paradigms, the person can identify with the world as a whole, with all natural beings, and also more unitive states of consciousness are available to us. So awareness of what's available to us in terms of ego developmental stages is really crucial. As you all probably know, attention and the quality of perception contribute to our quality of experience. Perception is a dynamic act of creative engagement with the world. And really, our perception can influence our sense of self in terms of who we are in relation to things. Typically, this sense of self is determined by the level of complexity as well as integration that we experience in relation to the world. According to energy psychology, if thoughts and beliefs are inconsistent with the nature of reality, or if we experience the self as separate and fixed, this can cause an energetic disturbance in the human system. I want to talk about a little bit about non-duality and the natural state, just to explain kind of the paradigm behind it. So to talk about non-duality, we can first talk about duality. So duality means thinking in terms of good versus bad, mind versus body, self versus other. And duality really requires identification, which then entails separation. So in order to talk about something, we need to identify it first and then, talk about it. Language, thoughts, and concepts are all based on duality. And while this can be very useful in order to communicate, if a person identifies with a thought or a concept and believes that this is all that there is to reality, this can lead to a fragmented experience of the world. Now, the non-dual paradigm speaks to the fact that in nature, there are no absolute states, there are no fixed states. According to the physicist David Bohm, everything is interconnected and going through a continuous process of becoming. The philosophy of non-duality is very old. It actually is about a millennia old BC. And it starts with the earliest Upanishads. It's actually across all religions, it can be noticed. But specifically, within the Upanishads, Advaita Vedanta philosophy, which literally means not two, speaks to this idea that everything is one. And it's interesting, most people are familiar with the concept that, all is one. But with Advaita, the point is to actually say there is no two. And it's kind of a reminder in our daily activities, although we experience everything as separate, it's a teaching that reminds us that, there's an underlying reality behind what we can perceive. According to Advaita Vedanta, God or Brahman and true self or the soul, Atman, are the same. Also in Buddhist philosophy, this is explained through the idea of emptiness, or the fact that nothing exists in and of itself, and that everything only exists in relation to other things. So this idea of mutual interdependence. So everything that appears as separate is simply a manifestation of this absolute undifferentiated reality, and having true knowledge is, the knowledge of non-duality, and it leads to liberation, whereas belief in duality leads to separation and suffering, and is based on ignorance, according to the Buddhist philosophy. It's really important to note that non-duality is not something that can be just understood with a conceptual mind. It cannot fully be described in words. It is a state of being, so it is something that can only be truly known through a direct experience of things as they are. And this direct experience of things as they are is called the natural state in literature. And the natural state is this experience of effortless effort, or just having enough effort to feel what's alive in us. And this is a state of being that's essentially not controlled by the mind. It's beyond the conditional thought. In Tibetan Buddhism, there's this idea of Dzogchen, or continuous awareness or contemplation of the natural state. And I just wanted to also mention that in Tibetan, this term Dzogchen means great perfection or total completion. It is the original state of every living being, whether they're aware of it or not. The rational mind, due to the fragmented nature of it, is incapable of comprehending this unified nature of reality. And again, according to Motoyama, to gain true understanding of the world, one must go beyond the rational mind and unify with the thing itself, or to experience it. So I just wanted to show an example of a dual versus non-dual view. So in the picture on the left, we see a typical dualistic perspective. We see a picture of a cup. And in this view, you know, a cup is a cup. That's all it ever was. That's all it ever will be. And regardless of what we do with it, you know, that the reality of the cup doesn't change. But according to the non-dual perspective, we still see the same thing, but we have a much deeper understanding that this cup was something before. It came from clay, which came from earth, which came from minerals. And that also, depending on what we do with it, whether we use it to recycle it into a different type of clay, or if we throw it into the garbage, we will essentially change the reality of the cup. So the non-dual perspective shows that indeed, you know, we're not separate from it. We're all together in this, in co-creating this process of becoming. I also wanted to give an example or a metaphor of the natural state, since this is something that cannot be really described in words. So a metaphor is useful. The picture of the left shows natural state as the light of the sun. So the sun naturally has lights and rays, but when the sky is cloudy, we do not see the light. So the clouds really, in this case, represent dualistic conditioning or thoughts. And, you know, the nature of the sun does not change with the clouds appearing. They're just obstructing this ultimate reality that's behind. So the clouds represent our obstacles that are a result of dualism and dualistic conditioning. And when they are overcome, the natural state can shine in all of its manifestations without really being altered or modified in any way. So according to Adyashanti, non-dual awareness, there's an interesting quote about it, to perceive everything as one is not an altered state of consciousness. It's an unaltered state of consciousness. It is the natural state of consciousness. By comparison, everything else is an altered state. Real meditation is not about mastering a technique. It's about letting go of control. It's our attachment to the mind that is the problem. When we let go of the thinking mind, we become open to insight, to what in spirituality we might call revelation, or the spontaneous arising of a deep wisdom or a deep knowing. I also wanted to give an example of a non-dual view, just to kind of help us get our minds around that. This is according to Fisher and his book, Eco-Psychology. My lungs have no meaning without air, which has no meaning without plants, which have no meaning without the sun, and so on ad infinitum. So now I'm gonna talk about the research study that I did in April and May of this year. The purpose of my study was really to explore whether increasing awareness of non-duality in the natural state would have effects in young adults who are affected with depression and anxiety. My hypothesis was that increasing awareness of non-duality in the natural state can reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety and improve well-being. Also that knowledge and experience of non-duality in the natural state can be useful, and that the better understanding and more profound the experience of non-duality in the natural state, the more significant the psychophysiological effects. I used a mixed methodology using both quantitative and qualitative data. Quantitative data included age, gender, number of years experiencing depression or anxiety, other treatment received in the past, as well as levels of depression and anxiety before and after the study. Qualitative data included descriptions of experiences during each session, as well as at-home behavioral practices. And the research design consisted of, it was basically a 4-week-long study. I had one session per week. Each session was 1 hour long. And in each session, I had an educational, experiential, and a behavioral component. The study population included 17 young adults between 18 and 29. They were all living in Toronto, Canada. Average age was 23.5 and 59% were students. 76% were female, 18% were male, and 1% identified as non-binary. People were experiencing symptoms between 6 months and 14 years. Average time was 5.4 years. This is a picture of me in the first session. Young people received previous treatment that was inadequate in their opinion. Some of them received medication, some of them CBT, some of them practiced mindfulness, yoga. They were all familiar with meditation, but they were not, experienced daily meditators. And some tried the Canadian Association of Mental Health Bounce Back program. Data collection consisted of Beck Depression Inventory and the Generalized Anxiety Disorder 7 questionnaires. These are standard questionnaires for depression and anxiety. These were administered before the study, after the study, and 30 days after. Also, I had a study sign-up questionnaire where I collected demographics and reasons for joining the study, as well as in-session questionnaires where after each part of the session, educational, experiential, and behavioral, I collected descriptions of their experiences. There was also the end of study questionnaire where young people were able to talk about their overall experience from the study and effects on physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So just very briefly, each session introduced a new concept. In session number 1, the concept that was introduced was non-duality. And in the educational component for about 20 minutes, I talked about the fact that in nature there are no fixed states, that everything is going through a process of becoming. I gave the examples of the cup, and we kind of talked about the different non-dual and dualistic views. And also that non-duality is a direct experience beyond the conceptual mind. Then we had a very short 5 to 10 minute meditation, which was the experiential component. And this was a guided meditation that took them through a whole body relaxation and then introduced this idea of the space between thoughts. So I guided them to experience space between thoughts, as well as a sense of effortless effort and just feeling alive. After the session, I assigned a behavioral component, which was basically to practice non-dual awareness during the week and to become aware of dualistic and non-dualistic views as they go about their daily life, and to try to focus on this space between thoughts as much as they can. Session number 2 was based on the natural state. In the education component, I talked about the natural state as being this experience of being alive, and fundamentally being a relaxed state of contemplation. I talked about the fact that the state is always available if we know how to access it. And I also talked about heart rate variability and the importance of learning how to relax. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with heart rate variability, but essentially this is the space in between heartbeats. And for a healthy person, there's a high heart rate variability, which means that the human system can easily go from a state of activity to a state of relaxation. People who are depressed or anxious typically have a low heart rate variability, which means that they have a very difficult time relaxing and getting proper rest. And this is kind of the only physiological way to measure really anxiety and depression. It's becoming more popular now, but it's an ancient way actually to measure the health of the full system. During the experiential component, I took them through the same relaxation exercise, noticing the space between thoughts, and then introducing this idea of the natural state as the state of effortless effort and feeling alive. And then the behavioral component was an at-home exercise to practice the natural state during the week, and I introduced the sun metaphor to be able to access that in an easy way. During the third session, we talked about the emerging and relational nature of the mind. During the educational component, I explained that the mind has the ability to develop and that the health of the mind depends on the health of our relationship with ourselves and the world. I also spoke about ego developmental stages and how different stages are always available to us, and really increasing awareness of what stage of ego we're in can be very helpful on a day-to-day basis. The experiential component was building on the experiential meditation from the previous 2 sessions. And then once they're able to, once I took them through sensing the effortless effort and the natural state, I guided them to contemplate the quote, My lungs have no meaning without air, which has no meaning without plants, which has no meaning without the sun. And I just left them for a few minutes to contemplate that. And then the behavioral component was reflecting on the emerging and relational nature of the mind during the week. Session number 4 was really a review of the first 3 sessions. It was really important to me to have these young people kind of become masters of these 3 concepts. So we did a quick review, and then I talked about the future challenges as they relate to non-dual awareness, and the fact that the future of work and skills such as critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration really depend on our ability to access these non-dual states of consciousness, and where we can see ourselves as connected with others, and where we can see really the benefit of collaborating with other people. Also, we talked about the implications for economic and environmental sustainability, as well as technology and healthcare, with advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's becoming more and more important to really become familiar with the kind of human condition and what are really the problems that we're trying to solve with these extremely powerful technologies. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my experience during the study. I had a really high level of excitement. I'd never done something like this before. I could barely sleep. I was aware that these concepts would be new to most participants, so I didn't really know how they would react. And it was interesting because in the first session, I noticed a lot of, doubt, and people were kind of, looking at me kind of like, what is this about? But about 20 minutes into it, they realized what it was about, and they became very, very interested. I also was worried that having to kind of energetically work with a group of 17 people would be maybe overwhelming for me. Before the study started, I meditated on the group of participants that decided to join this study, and I intuitively knew that they were the right people for the study, and I really developed a high level of respect for them being a part of this and deciding to support this kind of research. I also had to be at my highest level of awareness and physical ability during this time. I practiced yoga and deep meditation every morning to get into the right mindset and to kind of establish this energetic balance that I felt I needed. Also, while I knew what the topics would be for each session, I didn't really finalize all the content before the session in advance. I kind of let the sessions inform me. So after the first session, that's when I kind of finalized the content for the second session and so on. And I felt that this organic way of kind of developing content based on their feedback was really what made this study really geared towards the needs of young people. So I felt that that was an important thing to do. Also, I welcomed every question with an open mind. I accommodated online makeup sessions for people who make the in-house sessions. And I really knew that I had to hold space for them and learn from them, as well as, teach them. And I felt like I needed to provide minimal guidance and really let them experience this on their own as much as possible. Not really interfere with their experience. That was my goal. So I'm going to talk about findings. So based on the Beck Depression Inventory, there are different stages to depression. There's normal, mild mood disturbance. These are both considered normal. Then there is borderline clinical depression. At this stage, it's advised to have either therapy or seek some kind of help. Then there is moderate depression and severe depression. Before the study, 12% were in the normal range, 23 had mild mood disturbance, 18 had borderline clinical depression, 41 had moderate, and 6% had severe depression. After the study, 59% of the people had normal symptoms, 23 had mild mood disturbance, 18 had moderate depression. And then 30-day follow-up, basically only one person still needed treatment, and 81% was within the normal, 13 was in the mild mood disturbance. What was also interesting about this is that reduction in depression symptoms was more than 50%, for people who had an average, who were on the cusp of clinical depression on average. So it had the highest effect for people who had basically a mild mood disturbance or were at borderline clinical depression. Reduction in depression was less than 50% for those who had average moderate depression symptoms. So this really speaks to this paradigm of prevention being really key. So just the next slide shows this in a more visual, kind of easy to see format in terms of percentage of participants requiring treatment before, after, and the 30-day follow-up. And then we had very similar results for anxiety. So according to the GAD-7 questionnaire, we have normal, mild, moderate, and severe levels of anxiety. Before the study, 6% were in the normal range, 18% were mild, 53% had moderate, and 23% had severe anxiety. After the study, 53% were in the normal range, 23% were in the mild range, 18% had moderate, 6% had severe anxiety. And then at the 30-day follow-up, it improved even more. So now we had 57% normal, 31% mild. And again, when it comes to anxiety, the normal and mild are considered normal. So you don't really require treatment. And then we had 6% moderate and 6% severe. So my conclusion was that the methodology created an upward spiral, because even after 30 days, young people continued to improve, which was really wonderful to see. So again, the next slide is just showing this requirement for treatment is significantly decreasing from before the study to after the study and at the 30-day follow-up. Also, I took this sign-up questionnaire to help people identify why they're really joining the study, and this was informed with my coaching research that I did in the pilot project before. Most people said that their reasons were feeling overwhelmed, worried about the future, feeling a lack of confidence, feeling confused, feeling disconnected, feeling that they are not where they need to be in life, finding it difficult to communicate, that they lack creative expression, and that they feel that what they do does not matter. And all of these had reduction in symptoms. Most significant reductions was in feeling overwhelmed, reduced by 65%. Feeling a lack of confidence was reduced by 47%. Feeling of confusion was reduced by 41%. Feeling disconnected was reduced by 42%, and so on. I also wanted to mention that most people were not familiar with these concepts before the study. When it came to non-duality, 58% were not familiar. When it came to the natural state, same, 58% were not familiar. And emerging and relational nature of the mind, 78% were not familiar. Those who were familiar with these concepts were reported being introduced to them through disciplines such as philosophy, geography, and psychology. And most people perceived these concepts as helpful. Non-duality was perceived as helpful, 88%, natural state, 94%, and emerging and relational nature of the mind, 100%. I want to talk about the phenomenological findings. The experiential component of the sessions, there was a really interesting trend. So in session number 1, participants were mostly feeling physically uncomfortable. They were not able to control their thoughts. However, they still were able to, more than half of them were able to experience the space between thoughts, 53%, and 23% were able to experience the natural state. In session 2, participants said that they were feeling more comfortable and relaxed physically and more able to let go of thoughts. There was a significant increase. Now 71% were able to experience the space between thoughts, and 53% were able to experience the natural states, almost double. And then in session 3, participants felt increasingly more connected, relaxed, and open. Some reported experiencing visions and dreamlike states and being more aware of the bigger picture. They also said that they had new insights into their relationships with self and others, and more clarity about the meaning of their life and their role in the world. Session 3 did not ask about the space between thoughts in the questionnaire, but about the natural state, and it showed that there was an increase in the ability to experience the natural state. Now they were at 58%. And they were also asked whether they were able to experience the relational nature of the mind. Now, this concept was the least familiar, and many participants were kind of not sure what exactly they should be expecting. They were expecting more of like a definitive definition of what that should feel like, which of course, by nature, is not possible to provide. But I found it really interesting that, most people said they were unsure whether they experienced it. They didn't say that they didn't experience it. And 18% reported being able to experience it. I also checked whether the number of experiences of non-dual state correlated in any way with the reduction in symptoms, and it did. Those who were able to experience non-duality 3 to 5 times had an average 71% reduction in symptoms and 47% of depression and 47% reduction in anxiety. And those who had 0 to 2 non-dual experiences had an average 49% reduction in symptoms of depression and about the same reduction in symptoms of anxiety. So it seems to be more relevant to symptoms of depression than anxiety. But even just having a couple of those experiences produced significant reduction in symptoms. I also want to talk about the behavioral component because these were also interesting written reflections. Every week before the next session, participants were to send me 250-word description of their behavioral experiences. And after week 1, with daily practice, they reported being able to increasingly access non-dual awareness and apply understanding of non-duality in daily life, which resulted in reduced worry, more focus on a process as opposed to outcomes, as well as increased ability to handle stressful situations. People basically said that it's not that stressful situations stopped happening, it's that they reacted to them differently. After week 2, with continued behavioral practice, participants were feeling more positive emotions, more hopeful, more accepting and calm. They were feeling more optimistic, connected, grateful, and happy. They started viewing stressful moments as temporary and were able to experience more peaceful moments. And this indicated that they were generally more relaxed and more positive. After week 3, participants were applying the knowledge of the emerging and relational nature of the mind and becoming more aware of the natural process of growth. Also being able to let go of an ego-based drive for control, because in this session we talked about ego development. And they developed this increased ability to forgive themselves and others and to accept things as they are. They reported feeling more in tune with their natural state beyond the conceptual mind, more open and able to receive creative insights, mystical experiences, dreams, and visions, which helped them connect with their true self and increase their creativity and confidence. In the end of a study questionnaire, I asked them about perceived effects on well-being, and increasing awareness of non-duality in the natural state had 71 people reported positive effects on their physical well-being, 100% of the participants reporting emotional and mental improvement in their well-being, and 71% reported improvement in their spiritual well-being. I think the important thing here is that no negative effects reported at any of these levels of being. The next slide is about, it includes some testimonials. I'm not going to go over them in detail, but essentially A lot of participants stated that this methodology was different from what they tried in the past, that it was refreshing because it didn't focus on negative things or the past, that it was a very positive and interesting way to think about mental health. I'm just going to read one of the testimonials that spoke really to me. I noticed profound changes in my physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects of life. My anxiety level has decreased, and I'm able to let go of thoughts and stressful situations easily. I feel connected to God spiritually. This gives me peace, stability, and hope. I feel emotionally and mentally stable. I am able to be present in the moment and can hold conversations with people. This was a goal for me, and I'm so happy and able to achieve it. I would always get distracted in the middle of conversations, but I'm now able to initiate and engage in one-on-one and group conversations. People have noticed the change in me. They tell me I look happier. I agree. I feel happier and more content with my life. This was a graduate student, and she was experiencing symptoms of depression and anxiety for 14 years. So it really had a significant effect on her. So just conclusion and implications, mental health paradigm based on diagnosis and treatment only is not sustainable. Young adults can be introduced to the philosophy of mind and gain a better understanding of the underlying causes that contribute to healthy mental development. This can lead to increased agency and meaning. Increasing awareness of non-duality in the natural state can contribute to prevention of anxiety and depression from going into the more severe stages. Also, increased direct experience and sense of connection can improve mental health and well-being. And this can help reduce the need for medication and costly therapy. I had a number of meetings after I conducted my study with universities in Canada, with University of Toronto, York University, Schulich School of Business, and an organization that's called Advancements in Mental Health. This organization is connected with the Schizophrenia Society of Ontario, and they were all very interested in this methodology and found it to be, different and very useful. So I'm going to continue those conversations. I feel that this methodology can be used for prevention, for mental health literacy programs, reduction of stigma and focus on the healthy development of the mind. Also, because the sessions were group-based, this is a different approach to mental health issues. Also, in these meetings at universities, I was asked whether I could create a professional training program for student counselors and psychologists, which I thought was a great idea. I believe I can also, or this methodology can be used for corporate workshops on mental health to empower young adults to improve critical skills for the future of work, such as critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, which can lead to better productivity. I also feel that this methodology can be used to support those who are interested in reducing medication and maybe going off of antidepressants because they need support in a different paradigm once they don't have the support of the medication. And of course, further research needs to be done on effects of this methodology, both on young adults and adults in general. And this is just a picture of me with some of the students who are now helping me create a mental health podcast for young people. And it's kind of generated this really nice momentum for a new open conversation in mental health. So I just wanted to do that. That was really cool. And then I have references and everything in this slide, so I will share that if you'd like to have access to that. And I would love to hear your questions at this point.
Wonderful. So, yeah, we have, I think, was it about 15 minutes for general questions? And so let's have at it. And then after the general questions, we have a short closed period with just the committee and
I was curious, how did you gather your participants?
Yes.
And where?
Right. So that was actually one of the things I would say I underestimated, the complexity of that task. I printed posters. I hosted them on different campuses. That was one way. I spoke with health and wellness centers at University of Toronto and York University. They posted posters in their facilities as well. However, what I realized very quickly, because just a week before the study was supposed to start, I only had, a couple of people signed up. I realized that I have to use social media and I have to use some paid advertising, targeting young adults in Toronto, and that really worked. So I would just say, that was the one thing that I underestimated, but I think I had about 30 people who contacted me who were interested, and then that kind of simmered down to 17. So I was happy, and also I was surprised that all of them completed the study, which was, I think, spoke to the fact that they were very interested. They became very interested in what we're going to discuss in the next session. So that was nice.
Of the 30 participants that you found,
yes,
that whittled down to 17, what was the exclusion criteria?
Exclusion criteria was not to be on medication. So I couldn't have anyone, because that would interfere, I think, with the results. But really it was more, they had to go through a few steps to actually register for the study. They had to complete the study sign-up questionnaire, the informed consent form, and the Beck Depression Inventory and GAD-7 questionnaire. So some people just didn't they were not, didn't go through with the application process. But I assumed that there would be, a lot of people that would go off. So that's why when signing people up, I really realized I need to shoot for a high number to get, enough people.
What was some of the feedback that you got from the students in their incorporating non-dual awareness in their personal lives? If you would share some of that.
Yeah, so for example, so the whole idea was this process as opposed to a fixed state. So some people were saying how, in daily situations, they would notice that they're focused on an outcome, and that, they tried shifting focus on the process, and it became a lot more enjoyable, and they ended up achieving whether the same outcome or a satisfactory outcome, but it was much more enjoyable. One example I can think of was this person was talking about running late for a class, and usually she would beat herself up. And remembering non-dual awareness, she realized, okay, I'm going through this process of learning, and these are the steps I need to learn in this particular situation, not to maybe, give myself more time, and that, even if I'm late to this one class, it's not going to mean the end of the world, but I will learn that, what I need to do in the future. And then she made it on time. But the whole, the experience of it with non-dual awareness, which was very different. And what I was really surprised by, I guess, was how many of these responses, many of these people were students, graduate level students, some were psychology students, some were neuroscience students, they really had a high level of criticism towards themselves. And this learning about non-duality and life being a process of learning really eased the pressure they were feeling on themselves. And I think they got a lot out of that, just knowing that, they're going through a process, they're not going to be perfect. And then learning that about themselves helped them realize that in other people as well. So if they got upset at someone, they realized, well, maybe I shouldn't be making conclusions about this. Maybe it's just one incident versus, oh, this person is like this and I can't trust them. They would think they're going through a process of learning, and I don't want to interfere with negative thoughts, So it really kind of worked both ways and seemed to be pretty powerful. Go ahead if you have any other questions.
I was wondering, are you planning to revisit the students maybe after a little bit longer period of time and see how they're incorporating that?
So I was asked by the University of Toronto to do a 6-month follow-up, which I'm going to do because I'm in contact with these students already because of the podcast and everything. So yes, I would like to do a 6-month follow-up. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the participants were very interested in additional information because I actually distilled a lot of this information into like 20-minute educational sessions. So it was very, very minimal. So they were really craving, like the list of resources that they can learn from. And I held off on providing that until the 30-day follow-up was done. And then whoever provided the 30-day questionnaire is completed, I gave them a list of resources. And I think only one person didn't provide the 30-day follow-up. So I think that, really with a methodology like this, it's all about daily practice and it's about establishing a way of being. So, it's going to be interesting to see whether people have been reading the resources, how much they've been kind of following through with their daily practices. Many of them were saying that the kind of 5 to 10 minute meditations that we did, that were very simple, helped them learn how to meditate, on a daily basis. So I think their symptoms after 6 months will probably, have something to do with whether they maintained the practice. So yeah, I'm curious to see. I think with, let's say, mental health literacy programs, that kind of follow through will be very important, and not just to provide like a one-off workshop, but to really provide an integrated way for people to learn about their mental development, and for that to be an ongoing thing that we talk about, just like we talk about physical health, nutrition or exercise or whatever. It's an ongoing conversation. So I think that's going to contribute.
Why were you curious to study that specific age-wise?
So I think the coaching project that I did in the summer of 2018 really informed me because I could see that young people were really looking for something different, and that they quickly were able to change or shift their paradigm. I was quite surprised. And during that coaching project, I realized I only need 4 sessions with people, like based on this non-dual paradigm. Actually, it was only 3 sessions, and then the 4th session was me kind of hearing about how they are changing things in their life. And I found that very motivating because I really believe in a person not being dependent on a therapist or on something else for their mental health. And it just informed me that young people are very receptive and they're really looking for something different. And I would love to do a study with the general population, with adults, but I have a sense that young people, that's the target group that really is key for this kind of intervention, because they're so open and they're really looking for something that's healthy, that's going to give them a different way of being, doing things. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we committee can ask questions too, right?
Yes.
So you mentioned heart rate variability.
Yes.
And how that's also an ancient method of measuring anxiety and depression. Would that be like post-diagnosis in traditional Chinese medicine? Or what kind of ancient method would...
Right, so it's used in acupuncture. People who provide acupuncture typically, good practitioners of Chinese medicine can detect heart rate variability just by feeling your pulse.
Post-diagnosis,
Right, pulse diagnosis. So that's one way. There are also very convenient devices today that can be just used on a finger. There are also chest straps that can be used. I was considering using a device like that to measure heart rate variability in participants, but it's a little bit more elaborate because you need to measure it a few times a day, depending on whether you're resting, whether you're active. So you kind of need to get an estimate based on the level of activity that you're involved in. but it is an ancient way to kind of know the health of the whole system.
Great. It was interesting how you described you made the sessions kind of organically. You developed the material interactively, sort of, right, with the group.
Right.
Did you put some thinking into how that could be generalized? In other words, if you're going to make this professional training program for therapists and counselors, that seems to be an important part, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. So I just want to make sure I describe it correctly. So I created the first session before the session happened. And then I collected feedback on experiences. I had questions and things like that. And that informed me on how to now really distill all the information I wanted to present in the second session in kind of the most effective way. And I think it was more, I was creating this methodology for this particular audience. They helped me create it in an organic way, but now it's a methodology for this audience. I just feel like if I created this less organically, if I kind of did all 4 sessions in advance, I would have not benefited from just this, feedback and information in terms of how they were processing information from the first session on. So it was more, it really helped me create the methodology. And I had a kind of an intuitive sense that that's what I need to do because I am dealing with a group that, I didn't really research any similar methodologies for this particular group. So it was kind of like, it needs to be right for this group. So I think that's what I was trying to say. I feel like this methodology is now the methodology I'm going to use. And there was only one thing that I wanted to mention, which was that one of the things that I was asked at the end of the study was, it would have been nice to have more group interaction. I didn't include group interaction on purpose because I felt that would interfere with the effectiveness of, non-dual, of introducing non-dual concepts. But I do feel that, because I wanted to test this out, I wanted to kind of isolate it. But I feel that the methodology moving forward can include group interaction and discussion. So instead of young people, writing down their experiences after the experiential session, they can discuss their experiences in a group. That's something that I would modify for kind of future use.
Yeah. Very good. Another quick question. The results are really amazing as far as reduction of symptoms.
Yes.
Did you put any thought or consideration into, is it possible they were trying to make you feel good that they had positive results or something like that? Or
of course, I was thinking about that. I think there was one element at the 30-day follow-up, which I do need to disclose. So winter is very long in Canada. This study was done between mid-April to mid-May, which is the end of winter in Canada. It was still cold when we finished the study. And then the season changed pretty rapidly at the end of May. So at the 30-day follow-up, we had like summer-like weather. So I think that could have contributed to the 30-day follow-up results. But I really think that another key attribute of young people is that they really are not that interested in pleasing anyone. That's what I noticed. And in the first session, I could feel that they were skeptical. I could really feel that they were listening to me, but not listening to me until I was through with the educational component and they got what I was talking about and that it was different. So maybe they were trying to, there was some part of them trying to make me feel happy, but it's not the sense that I got. I really got a sense that they got very interested in the subject matter because it was something that was new and that they really felt spoke to them, I think. And that, you know, I was not trying to tell them how to think. I was trying to help them experience something for themselves with minimal, you know, interference. And I feel like that they appreciated that approach.
Yeah, and the subjective testimonials, like you showed, they were clearly not made up. You know, they were authentic.
Yeah, so I encourage you to read the full dissertation because I actually wrote, I transcribed a lot of these experiential statements and testimonials, and from session to session, it's really interesting to hear what their experience was like. I really think that's kind of the heart of the dissertation. Obviously, I couldn't do that today, but you know, some of them made me cry. You know, they were really. I think they were honest and they were very descriptive of what they were going through. So,
yeah. Two questions about the results that kind of go together.
okay.
It looked like even those who reported no experience of non-dual state reported reduction in symptoms.
Yes.
And then I think a related question, it was interesting in your chart about the four types of symptoms: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. There are 29% that showed that said no results in physical, and also 29% in spiritual.
Yes.
Were those possibly the same people, and were they possibly the ones that had no experience of this state?
That's a good question. I would actually have to go back and check on that. I know that for spiritual experiences, a lot of people had their spiritual practice. They were a part of a certain religion, and they kind of talked about their even relationship to their religion in some of their reflections. And some of them, I think, just felt that, you know, they had the spiritual background, that they didn't need help there necessarily. So I noticed that in a couple of people who said that they had no effect in the spiritual realm. Physical, I'm not sure, but that's something I can look into, and it's a good question. Yeah.
And how about those who reported no experience of non-dual state, but did report the reduction in symptoms?
So I'm just going to go back to that slide because the natural state experiential component, actually very few people said that they didn't have an experience. Most people said that they either did have or were not sure.
Okay.
So I would say those who said they were not sure, it's likely that they had the experience, but you know, I think the major challenge was for them, how do I know if I had this experience, if this is so new and if I never practiced that before, right? So I think they were, you know, if they didn't know for sure they had it, they were kind of hesitant. And that's the whole dilemma of, you know, dualistic versus non-dualistic view, is the non-dual view or the non-dual experience is not something that can be described in words or really defined. So most people who said they were not sure, they likely still experienced some benefit, because even at the cognitive level, they started introducing and they started remembering to try to tap into these states as much as they can.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any general questions?
I don't have any questions. I have more comments.
Comments?
Great.
Should I make a comment?
Comments are good, yes.
I was thinking of a book that I read recently called Capture. And it's a very interesting book by somebody that was, I think, a major player in the FDA. And he was also a whistleblower. And one of the things he notes is how people get stuck in depression, anxiety, or something they just get stuck in it. Their mind is captured. Well, what you were doing provides a glimpse of something outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would suspect that even the percentage, was it 29%? Like sure, that if they still had that glimpse of something other than that ordinary state that they've been in, that's going to continue in some way. I think it was valuable. I also think
so.
It can be replicated easily.
Yes, yes. I think that, you know, this idea of non-duality, which is old, I mean, it's very old. I think my goal is to try to, you know, like many people before me, you know, to try to make it mainstream as an idea, as something that we can talk about. Because even knowing it at a conceptual level, you know, and trying to experience it, and maybe talking to other people about it and their experiences can bring up a new paradigm for the health of the mind, which is beyond conceptual thinking. So just like you said, it can open up something new, and having this in the collective awareness, I think, can be very beneficial. So I'll do my best to contribute to that.
Yeah. You mentioned ego development stages, and you said awareness of what's available is important. And so in your experiential or in your educational sessions, did you discuss like the difference between stage development and state experiences relative to this? And
right.
I'm just curious about that.
Right. So for ego developmental stages, I was trying to kind of condense a few different theories. And the way I described it was that, you know, there are pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional stages of ego development. And I describe it in terms of egocentric stage, where everything revolves around personal needs and personal wants, and where the person thinks they have a sense of control over things. And the downside of that is that, you know, they don't in reality, so they're trying to maintain control, and this takes a lot of energy, and they have the sense of failing doing that. And then the next stage that I described was ethnocentric, where they identify the sense of self with the community. However, at this stage, you know, it's all about comparison and judgment, and having an expert that's, you know, going to say how things are. And also, this is more of a conventional stage, and in modern time, you know, it's the prevalent stage, this kind of achiever stage of trying to really achieve success at all costs, to the environment, to other people. It's a lot of competition, and again, a lot of judgment. And what I described that to be crucial in this stage of ego development is that, you know, the highest level of this stage is the conscientious stage, where people start asking questions. You know, is this all there is to it? You know, if I achieved some level of success, is this enough? You know, what is enough? And so in this kind of conventional stage of ego development, the highest stage is really the stage of questioning. And these questions cannot be answered in the same paradigm. And then I talked about non-duality as being this kind of gap of understanding that, okay, we need to shift the paradigm in order to answer these questions. And what does that mean? It means to accept things as they are, to really experience things as they are, to know that, you know, every good has a little bit of bad, every bad has a little bit of good. So, you know, the gap is this non-dual awareness that needs to develop so that we can answer some of these questions. Also a sense of letting go of control, because we're not in control of everything, and letting insight come in so that we can be guided to what is the right thing to do. There is no predetermined right thing. We have to be open. And then I explained the next stage being based on this non-dual paradigm, which is more world-centric and having a sense of being a part of the world and being part of nature and everything. And then the ultimate stage being the unitive stage of consciousness, where really, we realize that we cannot succeed without other people. It's not possible, that we really have a high level of respect for contributions of others and for everything that's, that is a part of our reality. But also at this highest unitive stage, we realize that no stage is better than other. And this is kind of hard to comprehend. And I even said to them, this is hard for me to comprehend as well. But the whole point is that at the highest level of consciousness, it's not about comparison. It's about experiencing the world directly. It's about appreciating the learning that comes from every stage. And really the biggest kind of takeaway from knowing about the different levels of consciousness that are available to us is to remember to notice which stage we're in a particular situation. Are we operating at an ego stage, or are we operating at a more unifying stage? And this was really helpful for people because they said, first of all, I didn't know that this was available to me. I thought that I had to be in this achiever stage. And now I feel so relieved that, I don't need to think like this. There's more. There's another way of looking at things. So just kind of, again, it's about increasing awareness that helped them.
That's wonderful. Yeah. You distilled that into these short sessions.
Yes. That was the challenge.
Yeah. Did you have question and answer feedback during your educational sessions?
Right after the educational session, or actually, I think sometimes they would ask questions even during. One of the questions in the first session was, how can we, if we talk about non-duality, then how is that not duality, right? And so we had fun talking about that, about how, yes, that's the whole point. We have language, but then there are limits to language. And it's not to say that we can't talk about it, but to really know it, we have to move beyond language. And again, it's not that duality is wrong. It's just that, there's a higher level of knowledge that's deeper, that can contain both duality and non-duality. But the key is not to identify with a thought or a concept, and to know that this is a fragmented view of reality.
Any more comments? Well,
I guess I'd just like to say how proud I am. I think you gave a really wonderful presentation, and I don't have any general questions. I'll save those for our committee meeting. But yeah, I'm just really, I think you did a beautiful job.
Right.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and thank you for everything. I don't think I can thank you enough for the level of gentle guidance that you provided throughout the years. It was really incredible, so thank you.
So let's thank you for an excellent project and presentation. And
thanks. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
You've also set an excellent example for your peers that are observing this whole presentation. It's a great example of what's possible.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I would just say, keep doing what you're doing. I mean, it can be scary at times, and sometimes it feels lonely, but there's a real need for things like this. And I hope this information helps you somehow in kind of finding the niche for your own research, but there's a definite need. And I think young people specifically are a good group to maybe think about when you're doing your research. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
okay, we can adjourn to committee meeting now.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll stop the